The thunder of gunshots echoed through Idaho City's main street, sending dirt clouds spiraling into the warm summer air as Josephine Franklin pressed her body against the rough wooden boards of the general store. She'd arrived in Idaho Territory only days before, sent to live with her uncle after her parents' passing, but now found herself cowering as bullets ricocheted around her. This wasn't the fresh start she'd imagined when she'd stepped off the stagecoach. "Get down," a deep voice commanded as more gunfire erupted across the street. The shots came from both directions, from the saloon to her left and the bank to her right. Josephine froze, her pale blue dress collecting dust as she tried to make herself smaller against the building. She'd simply been purchasing supplies for her uncle's cabin when the shooting started. Something about stolen cattle, mining rights, and two families who'd hated each other longer than anyone could remember. The Sawyers and the Hendersons. Their feud was legendary throughout the territory, but she'd never imagined she'd find herself caught in the middle of it. Another bullet splintered the wooden post inches from her head, and she stifled a scream, her heart hammering wildly in her chest. She'd never make it across the street to safety with bullets flying everywhere. That's when she saw him, a tall man atop a chestnut stallion, cutting through the chaos with determined precision. He wore a dusty black hat, and his face was partially obscured by a bandana as he guided his horse directly toward her. Without a moment's hesitation, he reached down, strong arms encircling her waist, and hauled her up. "Hold on," he instructed, his voice steady despite the danger surrounding them. Before she could respond, he pulled her behind him on the horse and urged the animal forward, away from the gunfire. More shots rang out, and the stranger twisted in the saddle, shielding her body with his own as they rode. Josephine could feel the solid warmth of him, his back pressed against her chest as they galloped toward the edge of town. It wasn't until they'd cleared the buildings and reached a small creek half a mile away that he finally slowed the horse to a stop. Only then did he turn to look at her properly, pulling down his bandana to reveal a strong jaw and penetrating hazel eyes. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, dismounting in one fluid motion before helping her down. "No, I don't believe so," Josephine stammered, her legs trembling beneath her as her feet touched the ground. "Thank you for saving me." The stranger nodded, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Mason Taylor," he introduced himself, extending a weathered hand. "Sorry about the abrupt departure, but you were caught right in the middle of Sawyer and Henderson business. That's never a good place to be." Josephine accepted his handshake, noticing the calloused palm that spoke of hard work. "Josephine Franklin. I just arrived in Idaho City. My uncle is Samuel Franklin. He has a small ranch outside of town." Recognition flickered in Mason's eyes. "Old Sam's niece. He mentioned you'd be arriving." He glanced back toward town, where the gunfire had finally subsided. "Not exactly the welcome you deserved." "No," Josephine agreed, brushing dust from her skirts. "Is it always like this?" Mason chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "Only when both families come to town on the same day." He led his horse to the creek, allowing the animal to drink. "The Sawyers think the Hendersons stole their cattle. The Hendersons claim the Sawyers sabotaged their mining operation. Truth is, they've been at each other's throats since before the war, and neither side remembers why anymore." "And which side are you on, Mr. Taylor?" Josephine asked, studying him carefully. Mason looked up, his expression unreadable. "Neither. I work for myself." He gestured to the brand on his horse's flank, a simple MT with a star above it. "Have my own small spread north of here. Try to stay out of other people's quarrels." "Yet you rode straight into gunfire to help a stranger," Josephine observed. A slight smile crossed his face. Couldn't very well leave a lady in danger, Miss Franklin." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted them, and Mason immediately tensed, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. But his posture relaxed when an older man on a gray mare came into view. "Uncle Sam," Josephine called out in relief. Samuel Franklin's weathered face broke into a relieved smile as he dismounted. "Josephine, thank the Lord you're safe." He embraced his niece before turning to Mason. "Taylor, I heard what happened in town. Thank you for getting my niece out of there." Mason nodded. "It was nothing, Sam." "Nothing," Samuel snorted. "Riding into a crossfire between the Sawyers and Hendersons, I'd call that something." He glanced between them. "Anyone hurt in town?" "Just pride and property from what I could see," Mason replied. "Sheriff Daniels was calling for order when we left." Samuel sighed. "That feud's going to be the death of this town someday." He turned to his niece. "Come on, Josephine, let's get you home." As they prepared to leave, Mason helped Josephine onto her uncle's spare horse. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Josephine felt an unexpected spark that made her cheeks warm. "Perhaps we'll see each other again, Mr. Taylor," she said, summoning a brave smile. Mason's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Idaho City's small, Miss Franklin. I imagine we will." He placed his hat back on his head. "Try to stay out of the line of fire next time." Josephine watched him mount his chestnut stallion, struck by the grace with which he moved despite his tall frame. As he rode away, she couldn't help but wonder when their paths might cross again. The Franklin ranch was modest compared to some in the territory, but the cabin was sturdy, with a wide porch and windows that caught the morning light. Josephine quickly settled into a routine, helping her uncle with the household chores while learning about the small cattle operation he managed. 2 weeks after the shooting incident, Josephine was in town again, more cautious this time as she made her way to the general store. The town seemed peaceful today, with no sign of either feuding family. She was examining a bolt of fabric when the bell above the door chimed, and Mason Taylor stepped inside, removing his hat as he entered. Their eyes met across the store, and Josephine felt that same unexpected flutter in her chest. "Miss Franklin," he greeted her, approaching with measured steps. "Good to see you back in town. No bullets flying today, I promise." "Mr. Taylor," she replied, setting down the fabric. "Thank you again for your heroics that day. Just happened to be in the right place." He hesitated, then added, "I stopped by your uncle's place yesterday, but you were out." "Oh," Josephine tried to sound casual, though the news that he'd come looking for her sent a thrill through her. "I was helping Mrs. Peterson with her new baby." Mason nodded. "I wanted to invite you and your uncle to a gathering at my ranch this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just a few neighbors, some music, good food." Before Josephine could respond, the store owner, Mr. Pemberton, called over, "Mason, that order of fence posts you wanted came in yesterday." "Be right there," Mason called back before turning to Josephine again. "What do you say?" "Saturday around noon," Josephine smiled. "We'd be delighted, Mr. Taylor." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his serious expression. "Good. I'll look forward to it." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "And perhaps you might call me Mason." "Then you must call me Josephine," she replied, feeling suddenly bold. "Josephine," he repeated, as though testing the feel of her name. With a nod, he moved to speak with Mr. Pemberton, leaving Josephine wondering what exactly had prompted this invitation. Saturday arrived with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for an outdoor gathering. Josephine wore her best dress, a light green cotton with small white flowers embroidered around the collar, and pinned her dark blonde hair up carefully. When they arrived at Mason's ranch, Josephine was surprised by the size and condition of the property. The house was larger than her uncle's, with a freshly painted exterior and a sprawling porch. Corrals held fine horses, and cattle grazed in the distance. Clearly, Mason Taylor was doing well for himself. About 24 people had already gathered, and Mason spotted them immediately, striding over to welcome them. "Sam, Josephine," he greeted them warmly. "Glad you could make it." As he showed them around, Josephine noticed how the other ranchers treated Mason with respect, often seeking his opinion on matters. She also noticed several young women casting admiring glances his way, which made her wonder why he'd gone out of his way to invite her specifically. "Your ranch is impressive," she commented as Mason walked with her toward a table laden with food. "How long have you had it?" "5 years," he replied. "Came to Idaho Territory with nothing but a horse and a dream after the war, worked cattle drives, saved every penny." Pride crept into his voice. "Started with 20 acres and a run-down shack. Now it's 200 acres and growing." "You fought in the war?" Josephine asked carefully. Knowing it was still a sensitive subject for many, Mason nodded, his expression sobering. "Union cavalry. Spent 3 long years fighting battles I'd rather forget." He glanced at her. "Your father?" "Confederate," she admitted. "He never fully recovered from his injuries. That's partly why I came west after he and Mother passed too many painful memories in Virginia." Mason studied her for a moment. "The war's over. We're all Americans now, trying to make something of this frontier." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a stern-looking man with silver at his temples. "Taylor," the man acknowledged with a curt nod. "Didn't expect to see you socializing when there's trouble brewing." Mason's posture stiffened slightly. "Sheriff Daniels. Wasn't aware of any trouble that couldn't wait for Monday." The sheriff's eyes flicked to Josephine, then back to Mason. "Henderson's youngest boy claims 3 of their horses were stolen last night. Naturally, they're blaming the Sawyers." Mason sighed. "And you're here because?" "Because your land borders Sawyer property and you've hired some of their hands in the past," the sheriff replied. "Thought you might have heard something." "I haven't," Mason said firmly, "and my men know better than to get involved in that mess." The sheriff seemed unconvinced but nodded. "Just keep your eyes open. Last thing we need is more shooting in town." With that, he tipped his hat to Josephine and walked away. Mason ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Sorry about that." "Is there really going to be more trouble?" Josephine asked, concerned. "There's always trouble with those families," Mason replied grimly. "Best to stay clear of it." He managed a smile. "But not today. Today is for celebrating summer and good company." As the afternoon progressed, a small band began playing and couples formed on an area cleared for dancing. Josephine found herself enjoying the company and the festive atmosphere. When Mason asked her to dance, she accepted eagerly. His hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her through the steps. For a man who spent most of his time on horseback, he moved with surprising grace. "You dance very well, Mason," she commented, aware of the eyes watching them. "My mother insisted I learn," he replied with a small smile. "Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo." Josephine laughed, relaxing into the dance. "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Mason agreed, a shadow briefly crossing his features. "Died of fever when I was 16. Father followed 3 years later." "I'm sorry," Josephine said softly. Mason's eyes met hers. "That's life on the frontier, makes you value what you have while you have it." The intensity of his gaze made her heart quicken. "Makes you recognize what matters when you find it." The dance ended before Josephine could decipher his meaning, but throughout the remainder of the afternoon, Mason stayed close by, introducing her to neighbors and friends. His attention clearly focused on her despite the many demands on his time. As the sun began its descent, Josephine found herself sitting beside Mason on a bench near the corral, watching the golden light cast long shadows across the land. "It's beautiful here," she said, taking in the rolling hills and distant mountains. "It is," Mason agreed, but when she turned, she found him looking at her rather than the landscape. He cleared his throat. "Josephine, I was wondering if I might call on you properly sometime." The directness of his question surprised her, but not unpleasantly. "I'd like that very much," she replied honestly. A genuine smile spread across his face. "Good. That's good." The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Mason stood immediately, his relaxed demeanor vanishing as a group of riders approached at speed. "Trouble," he muttered, moving protectively in front of Josephine as the riders pulled up in a cloud of dust. "Taylor," called the leader, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard. "We need to talk." Mason stepped forward. "James Sawyer, this is private property and a private gathering." Sawyer's eyes narrowed. "3 of my men were just attacked on the North Road. Henderson men. Said you gave them permission to cross your land to get to us." "That's a lie," Mason replied evenly. "No one crosses my property without my say-so, and I haven't given the Hendersons or anyone else permission to use my land." The tension in the air was palpable as other guests began to gather behind Mason. Josephine saw her uncle moving closer, his expression concerned. Sawyer spat on the ground. "Someone's lying then, and I aim to find out who." "Not here, not now," Mason said firmly. "I have guests. Whatever quarrel you have with the Hendersons stays between you and them." For a tense moment, Josephine feared Sawyer might refuse to leave, but finally he jerked his head in a nod. "We'll talk tomorrow, Taylor. Make sure you're home." With that, he wheeled his horse around and the group rode off. The festive mood was broken. Guests began making excuses to leave, casting nervous glances in the direction the Sawyers had gone. Mason apologized to each one, his jaw tight with anger. "We should go too," Uncle Sam said, appearing at Josephine's side. "This could get ugly fast." Josephine nodded, though she felt reluctant to leave Mason dealing with the aftermath alone. When they found him to say goodbye, his expression was troubled. "I'm sorry about this," he said quietly to Josephine. "Not exactly how I planned for the day to end." "It's not your fault," she assured him. "Will you be all right?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I'll be fine." "The Sawyers make a lot of noise, but they know better than to start trouble with me." He hesitated, then added, "I still plan to call on you if that's all right." "I'll look forward to it," she replied, meaning it. As they rode home, Uncle Sam was unusually quiet until they were nearly at the ranch. "Mason Taylor's a good man," he finally said. "One of the best in the territory, but he's in a difficult position with his land where it is." "Between the Sawyers and Hendersons?" Josephine asked. Her uncle nodded. "Both families want his water rights and grazing land. He's refused to sell to either side, which hasn't made him any friends, but he's fair and honest, and that's rare enough out here." He gave her a sideways glance. "He seems taken with you." Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "The feeling may be mutual, Uncle." Samuel smiled. "Can't say I'm surprised. Just be careful, Josie. Getting close to Mason means getting close to that feud, whether you want to or not." 3 days later, Mason called at the Franklin ranch as promised. He brought a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked himself, and asked if Josephine would accompany him on a ride to see a beautiful spot he knew by the river. With her uncle's blessing, they set out, Josephine riding a gentle mare Mason had brought for her. As they traveled, he told her more about his dreams for his ranch and asked about her life back in Virginia. "I taught at a small school for a time," she explained as they rode side by side across a meadow dotted with late summer wildflowers. "But after my parents died, there was nothing to keep me there." Uncle Sam's letters about Idaho Territory always sounded so full of possibility. Mason nodded. It is that. Hard work and heartbreak too, but possibility most of all. He guided his horse around a rocky outcropping. What do you think of it so far? Think you could make a life here? The question seemed to hold more weight than casual conversation. I think I could, Josephine replied carefully. It's wilder than Virginia, but there's a beauty to it I never expected. They reached a bend in the river where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the water pooled in a calm, clear basin before continuing its journey. Mason helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. They sat on a fallen log, watching the water sparkle in the sunlight. Mason seemed preoccupied, and finally Josephine asked, "Did you speak with James Sawyer after the gathering?" Mason's expression darkened. "I did. He still believes someone used my land to attack his men, but it wasn't the Hendersons." "How do you know?" "Because I rode the entire property line the next morning and found tracks. Whoever crossed my land was trying to make it look like Henderson riders, but they made mistakes." He picked up a stone and skipped it across the water. "Someone's trying to inflame the feud while making me look like I'm taking sides." "But why?" Josephine asked, troubled by the thought. Mason looked at her directly. "Land, money, power. The usual reasons men cause trouble," he sighed. "The Hendersons have been trying to buy my eastern pasture for years. The Sawyers want my water rights. Neither is happy I won't sell." Josephine considered this. So if they were at war with each other, they might not notice a third party moving in, Mason finished grimly. "At least that's my guess." "Have you told the sheriff your suspicions?" Mason shook his head. "Not yet, need more proof first." His expression softened as he looked at her. "I'm sorry to burden you with this, Josephine. It's not what I intended for our ride." "Don't apologize," she said, impulsively placing her hand over his. "I want to know what concerns you." His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. "You're not what I expected, Josephine Franklin." "What did you expect?" she asked, suddenly very aware of how close they were sitting. A smile tugged at his lips. "Not someone who would keep her composure during a gunfight, that's certain, or who would listen to talk of feuds and land disputes without batting an eye." "I'm tougher than I look," she replied with a small smile. "I can see that," he said softly, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again. "May I call on you again, Josephine? Perhaps take you to dinner in town?" "I'd like that very much," she answered honestly. The moment was perfect, the gentle sound of the river, the dappled sunlight through the leaves, the warmth of his hand holding hers. When Mason leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Josephine found herself meeting him halfway. The kiss was gentle and brief, but it sent her heart racing. When they parted, Mason's expression was a mixture of wonder and satisfaction. "I've been wanting to do that since I pulled you onto my horse," he admitted. Josephine laughed softly. "Even with bullets flying around us." "Especially then," he replied, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Nothing clarifies a man's thoughts quite like danger." They spent another hour by the river, talking and sharing stories, before Mason reluctantly suggested they head back. As they rode, Josephine felt lighter than she had in months, perhaps years. There was something about Mason Taylor that made her feel both safe and exhilarated at once. Their courtship progressed steadily over the following weeks. Mason called regularly, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry, honey from his hives, or flowers from his garden. They attended church together on Sundays, rode across the beautiful countryside, and gradually shared more of their histories and hopes. Josephine learned that Mason had plans to expand his cattle operation and eventually build a larger house for a family someday. He'd said with a meaningful look that made her blush. She told him of her dream to perhaps start a small school in Idaho City, as the town was growing and had many children but no formal education yet. But beneath their growing romance, the tension between the Sawyers and Hendersons continued to simmer. Twice more, incidents occurred that each family blamed on the other, though Mason remained convinced someone else was orchestrating events. "The timing is too convenient," he explained one evening as they sat on her uncle's porch after dinner. "Every time it seems they might reach some understanding, something happens to set them at each other's throats again." "Have you found any proof of who might be behind it?" Josephine asked. Mason frowned. "Not exactly, but there's a land speculator named Victor Holloway who arrived from California about 6 months ago. He's been buying up small parcels all around the valley, and he's made offers to both families at suspiciously good prices." "You think he's trying to force them to sell by keeping the feud alive?" "It would make sense. Land's the only real wealth out here." He took her hand. "I'd feel better if you were extra careful in town. If I'm right about Holloway, he's not above using underhanded tactics to get what he wants." Josephine squeezed his hand. "I'm always careful." But 3 days later, her caution wasn't enough. She had gone to town to mail letters and purchase supplies when she heard shouting from the direction of the bank. Before she could seek shelter, men on horseback came thundering down the street. Hendersons, from their distinctive gray horses with black manes. At the same moment, Sawyer men emerged from the saloon, guns drawn. Josephine found herself frozen in the middle of the street, directly in the line of fire between the two groups. The first shot came from somewhere behind her, and suddenly, bullets were flying in all directions. Josephine dove toward a water trough, but it offered little protection from the crossfire. "Josephine!" She heard Mason's voice through the chaos and looked up to see him galloping toward her on his chestnut stallion, weaving through the gunfire with remarkable skill. Without slowing, he leaned down and scooped her up, pulling her behind him on the horse. She clung to his waist as he urged the animal forward, shielding her body with his own as bullets whizzed past them. One shot came perilously close, and Mason grunted in pain but kept riding until they reached the edge of town. Only then did he slow the horse, and Josephine realized with horror that blood was seeping through his shirt at the shoulder. "Mason, you're hit," she cried, helping him dismount. "It's nothing," he insisted, though his face had paled. "Bullet just grazed me. Are you hurt?" "No, thanks to you," she replied, helping him to sit beneath a tree. She tore a strip from her petticoat to press against the wound. "This is the second time you've saved me from that feud." Despite his pain, Mason managed a smile. "Let's hope there isn't a third." His expression grew serious. "This wasn't random, Josephine. I saw Holloway standing on the hotel balcony just before the shooting started. He disappeared the moment guns were drawn. You think he arranged it?" Mason nodded grimly. "I'm almost certain of it, and I think I can prove it now." 2 days later, with his arm in a sling but otherwise recovering well, Mason met with Sheriff Daniels, James Sawyer, and William Henderson at the neutral ground of the sheriff's office. Josephine waited anxiously outside with her uncle, praying that Mason's evidence documents showing Holloway had hired men to commit acts designed to inflame the feud would be enough to convince the families. When the door finally opened, the expressions on the men's faces told her everything she needed to know. There was anger, certainly, but it was directed at Holloway, not each other. For perhaps the first time in decades, the Sawyers and Hendersons had found common ground. "Holloway's been arrested," Mason told her, relief evident in his voice. "He'll stand trial for inciting violence, attempted murder, and fraud. Both families have agreed to a truce while they sort through which incidents were actually caused by each other and which were Holloway's doing." "That's wonderful news," Josephine said, taking his good hand in hers. "There's more," Mason continued. "They've also agreed to establish clear boundaries and water rights with me acting as a neutral mediator." He smiled. "It's not peace exactly, but it's a start." Over the following month, Mason worked tirelessly with both families, helping them negotiate terms that would allow both to prosper without conflict. His fair-mindedness and integrity earned him respect from both sides, and gradually, the tension that had defined Idaho City for so long began to ease. Throughout it all, his devotion to Josephine only deepened. They spent every possible moment together, their conversations ranging from literature to ranching to dreams of the future. On a crisp October evening, with the aspen trees turned golden and the first hint of winter in the air, Mason took Josephine back to the spot by the river where they'd shared their first kiss. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," he said as they walked hand in hand along the riverbank. "About what I want my life to be." "And what have you decided?" Josephine asked, her heart quickening at his serious tone. Mason stopped, turning to face her fully. "That I don't want to face it without you." He reached into his pocket and produced a small ring with a modest diamond. "I know we haven't known each other long in the grand scheme of things, but out here, life doesn't always give you the luxury of time." He took her hand. "Josephine Franklin, I love you more than I thought possible. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy sprang to Josephine's eyes. "Yes, Mason. Yes, I will." His face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her into his arms, his kiss filled with all the promise of their future together. They were married in the small church in Idaho City on the first Sunday of December, 1872. The ceremony was attended by neighbors, friends, and remarkably, members of both the Sawyer and Henderson families seated on opposite sides of the church, but peaceful nonetheless. As they exchanged vows, Josephine reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together: a dangerous feud, bullets flying, and a brave cowboy who'd risked his life to save a woman he didn't even know. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." As Mason's lips met hers, sealing their union before God and their community, Josephine knew that sometimes love found you in the most unexpected circumstances, even in the crossfire of an old feud in the wild Idaho Territory. Over the years that followed, Mason and Josephine Taylor built a life filled with love and purpose. The school Josephine established in Idaho City flourished, educating the children of ranchers and townspeople alike, while Mason's ranch grew into one of the most prosperous in the territory. They welcomed their first child, a son they named Samuel James, in the fall of 1873, followed by twin daughters, Elizabeth and Catherine, 2 years later. Their home became known for its hospitality, a place where travelers, neighbors, and even former enemies could find welcome and fair treatment. The feud that had once defined Idaho City gradually faded into memory, replaced by cooperation and community. And whenever they passed the spot in the street where bullets had once flown around them, Mason would squeeze Josephine's hand, a silent reminder of how their love story began in danger, with courage, and against all odds.